Okay, so I am just going to go over your lesson plan and give you a few suggestions that you can change to make this a little more early childhood friendly. It's a wonderful lesson. The lesson itself is really good. I really like it, and I love kites, so I was really happy to see kites in there. So, just so you know, I want you to make some changes to make it more early childhood friendly. And also, I'm wondering if you've actually done this lesson with kids because there's parts of it that I'm not sure would actually work in a classroom setting as one lesson, but you actually have several lessons in here. In other words, several activities that should actually each be a lesson. So I'm going to try to help point that out to you. When I was first teaching, I did that too. So I really understand how hard it is to say, oh, that's one lesson, that's another lesson, that's another lesson. So I really understand. It took me a long time to write lesson plans that way too. So I get that. So you have really good description of the backgrounds and the what languages they speak. That's really great. I appreciate that so much, and I think it would really be fun to have them see if there's a word for wind in their language and kite in their first language. So I would encourage you to do that. By the way, I wanted to say I would have a little chart in the room and maybe come up with 4 or 5 words that you're going to use a lot in this science unit of study, and have them tell you, or you can Google translate it, and you probably already know that, I'm sure, and put the name of the item in their first language. And also, it'll be interesting to see if there is a word for that in their first language. I'm not sure what language from Somali you mean. The Somali students I've had speak very different languages. Some of them speak French, some speak Arabic, some speak languages that are indigenous to their country, Somalia. So just be really careful with that. I don't know if that's what you were told or you just know they're from Somalia, and so you made the leap that they speak Somali, so to speak. So if you could correct that, make sure that's correct. If it's not correct, make sure that they you know what languages they speak. And I find sometimes that students from, especially the countries in Africa, they actually speak several languages. So they're actually multilingual and not dual lingual. And because that's one of my specialty areas, I always point that out. Okay, so again, you've done nothing that's wrong, so to speak, but I really want you to facilitate that. In addition to visuals, you could also think about what are those words in their language and use those. And that's a really great thing to be able to do in a classroom. So, and something I also encourage my students to do is not think of it as a language barrier, but to think of it as that we know these languages, they know these languages. We don't have a language in common yet. When we say barrier, it puts the blame, so to speak, on the speaker, on the person who's listening, who's not the speaker, the listener, as if they've put up a barrier to us by not speaking our language, which is English in the United States. So anyway, that's just a little aside since you are at Americana, and I don't know if if English is your first language or not. You certainly have command of, you speak English fluently. So, but I don't want to assume that was your first language. You also may speak many languages for all I know. So I just wanted to acknowledge that too. So I'm sure you understand a lot of what I'm saying from your own experience. The students will be in a small group and whole group. So right there, it tells me you have two separate lessons. So I want you to make a choice there. Are you going to have them, which of the activities are you going to have them do? The whole group one or the small group one? In terms of making kites, that should actually just be a center where they can make a choice to come and make one. In early childhood, making things all at the same, even in small groups, is really not appropriate. If you're going to have a teacher at the table kind of helping them with little things they need to do, then you should have a table for that. And I would suggest you break this up into two, actually. I would have a table where they make art on a piece of paper that's going to be their kite. If they're old enough, you could have them cut out the shape of the kite themselves. And then as far as assembling the kite, that's more of a fine motor manipulatives activity. So you would want to move it once they make it. You would have the materials or decorate it, excuse me, then you would move it. So you really have several lessons in this. So I just need you to decide which one you're going to write up here. I hope that makes sense. Then as far as children experimenting with kites outside, you could make that the lesson. As a teacher, you could bring in kites, wait for the windy day, and then, do your kite outside and then follow up with something. This whole description of creating the kite, I would prefer there were not many activities where teachers had to assist. So, but for this, I can see where you would let them do most of it themselves, like decorate it and all of that, decide what shape it's going to be, everything like that. And then you would help them put it together at another table. And as far as their kites flying, I'm just going to caution you. I've done a lot of kite making with kids. And unless you have authentic kite paper, which you can buy, I actually have some here at my house left over from when I used to make kites. But I made real kites with older kids. And by older, I mean middle school. So I would just caution you that I have never seen anyone make homemade kites with children that actually fly so that they can observe the direction of their kite, unless the teacher has actually done most of the work and made it so that it will fly, which means you shouldn't do it. If you're going to do something like that, just buy kites and bring them in and let them make kites, but don't have them try to fly their own kites, because when they don't work, I've observed lessons like that being done, and it's crushing for kids to think their kite is going to fly like that and then not have it fly. So just, I would like you to rethink this a little bit on that part. As far as direction goes, preschool is not appropriate to talk about direction. They don't have a sense of right and left or up. They may know up and down, and they may know over and under. And even the ones that know right and left can't really tell you what direction something's going in. And it's not appropriate for them to try to figure it out. What you could do is, while the kite's flying, you could have them point with their finger and follow the kite with their finger, just so they can experience, the movement of the kite that way. That would be appropriate. And as far as them explaining to what the kite does when the wind blows and stops blowing, I will say I would leave that out, because you can't predict that. It's not predictable. If you get lucky and that happens, great. Then you can say, oh, what happens when the wind stops blowing? But honestly, you can't predict what the wind is going to do. And so I would just leave that out. Children will be able to explain their observation and drawing. that's really not appropriate for their age. What I would suggest is that you do some games where you pretend to blow them and let them move all around and that kind of thing. And you could tell them what would happen if you were drawing and I blew your crayon. What direction would it go? Would it go over this side of your paper, that side? Then you could talk about that. But the movement would all be in their hands and they would be pretending. So I'm trying to give you some examples of how you could do it appropriately, but these are really, and again, you have here several lessons. So this is more of a unit of study than one lesson. So try to make a decision and break it down. And, your standards are fine. And here's your assessment. I will have a checklist for students' illustration of their observation. I think that's great if you're noticing if they're interacting with peers. I would pull out this idea that they would know what would happen when the wind blew and when it stopped. And I would take out that they portrayed the direction of the wind. You might want to put in their crayon drawings, when I pretended to blow, they moved their hand. That would tell you that they understand the wind moves things. It blows things around. And I would take out the portrayal of the kite direction moving. That's way over their heads. Okay, so here's all your materials. And okay, you're going to talk about the wind and show an animation of the wind. And, honestly, you can do that if you want. It's not going to be harmful, but it's not going to really help them. They have to experience the wind on top of it. And again, this is a tricky lesson. It's a great lesson, but you kind of have to wait for the right day to do it. So you could have it ready if you have a windy day, have it ready to go for sure. But it's a really difficult lesson because you're counting on the wind blowing. And you should not do this lesson if the wind isn't blowing. You should not just tell them about wind. You could ask them if they've experienced wind and do a chart about that. What happened when you saw the wind or heard the wind or felt the wind? You could do something like that with it. And I will say with the paper you're using here, the likelihood that their kites are going to fly, I've not really had good luck with that or seen teachers have much luck with it. But it's fine to decorate kites. You should bring some real kites in, and then or if you can't afford those, that's fair. You could show them pictures of kites in books, and have them decorate their own kite just as an art activity, but not with the idea that you would actually fly it. And large popsicle sticks, all of that will look like a kite, but it won't fly like a kite. And they shouldn't be set up to think that it will, if that makes sense. So just, again, you've got a couple of lessons in here, so I'm trying to break it down into parts for you. Yeah, okay, great. You're going to ask them how it feels and all of that. That's wonderful. And I myself would prefer that my students don't use videos with children. So I would prefer you took it out, but of course, when you're a teacher and if you're allowed to use videos in your classroom, then you can use them. So, but that is actually 2 separate lessons. The book, the discussion, and the video are 3 separate lessons. So that's what I'm trying to help you see. And then, if there's some Spanish words in it, that's great. But you should also have the words in other languages if you're going to do that. So that's a caution. Just be careful that you represent all the languages, not just one of them. I would be careful with that. So that I would not use any. This is, you can see here it says kindergarten, so this is not appropriate for their age. So just take that out. An animation that explains the wind is not appropriate in preschool, so just remove that completely. It's also another lesson, so just take it out. And the way you're setting this up, where they go as a group to make a kite and all of that, I think you should rethink this and make it a center. It's anyway. This taking turn back and forth and all of that. I just make it a center. And again, I don't think you should do this thing where you're making a kite and then going outside and flying it, because I don't think it's actually going to happen. I've never seen that happen in a classroom. You just can't predict the wind. So I think you should really rethink this whole thing. And so I'm going to leave it there. And I want you to rethink this a lot. Your questions about the kite going up, just maybe make it the class kite. Like, just bringing in a kite and doing this would be a lesson. You wouldn't have to do anything else. So I'm trying to help you see that you have many, many lessons in this one lesson plan. And so I think that, I think that's all. Then there's something here that actually was in another student's paper too. And it says, revised for EDTP 440 by Jessica K. Hardy, 9/12/17. So I need to understand from you all that are submitting these what that is. So if you can explain that to me, I would appreciate that. Okay. All right. I hope this is helpful. Again, wonderful stuff, all good stuff. Just make those changes that I suggested, but mainly choose one thing to do. And I would caution you very strongly about depending on the wind blowing, because you can't. It's hard to do. You would have to just have this as what I did when I was a teacher was I always had my wind box of stuff for wind discovery, activities, and I just waited for windy days to pull it out. So I hope that's helpful to you.